Hi, everyone.
Hello. This segment of Ray Franz's In Search of Christian Freedom is under the subhead Heavy Loads. Why heavy? Question mark. He's talking about the letters that Carl Adams and now Anthony Fuelo and maybe some others that had come to the attention of the governing body back in the 1970s, references to the pressure that the society was continually putting upon publishers to meet quotas.
Mm-hmm.
And Ray can't help but reflect upon Christ's comments about heavy loads here when he says, reading such letters, the words of Jesus come to mind when he said of the religious leaders of his day, they tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Ray says, I remember that at one time I found it puzzling that Jesus would describe the traditions imposed by the Pharisees and others as a grievous burden. Many of the traditions involve simple things such as washing of hands, plates and cups. Others simply call for not doing certain things, such as refraining from specific acts on the Sabbath that traditional rulings of the religious leaders categorized as work or labor. What then was so burdensome about washing one's hands or refraining from certain work?
Analyzing the matter, however, it became clear that the truly grievous factor was that their righteousness was being judged on this basis. It was not the mere doing or not doing that produced such an oppressive weight. It was having to conform to the standards of imperfect men, standards imposed on them by ecclesiastical authority. It was being made constantly aware that failure to conform would result in their devotion to God being placed in question, would result in their being viewed as lacking in faith and righteousness, as being fleshly, unscriptural persons. If they were, unspiritual persons, If they were at all conscientious, this would be painful. The effect was a hobbling and straitjacketing of their exercise of conscience. It placed them in a man-made harness as to their service to God. By submission to this, service, which should have brought joy, became a wearisome load fastened upon them, one from which they never seemed to gain relief. What a contrast, then, the invitation of God's Son. And he quotes here from the New English Bible, Matthew 11:29 and 30. Come to me, all whose work is hard, whose load is heavy, and I will give you relief. Bend your necks to my yoke. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble-hearted, and your souls will find relief. For my yoke is good to bear, my load is light.
For anyone to apply these biblical principles to the situation found among Jehovah's Witnesses would result in his being judged by the organization as someone desiring to shirk the obligation for sharing in kingdom preaching, even as an act of apostasy. Yet, in a parallel way, it is not that the activity of going from door to door is of itself such a demanding feat. Most witnesses go about it in a quite routine manner anyway, nor is it the simple act of filling out of a report slip any more difficult than washing one's hands before eating. The burdensome factor lies in the significance that the organization attaches to these things, the way they are used as indicators of the genuineness of one's devotion to God, and the testimony of the organization's own representatives, plural, shows that the scriptural principles discussed do indeed fit. And I think we should add that since Ray wrote these things some 30 years ago, the evidence is that the stress level of Jehovah's Witnesses has just increased, and that the mental health of Jehovah's Witnesses is actually, from what I can see, deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not got better. The yoke that Christ said was easy is not easy for Jehovah's Witnesses.
There's their own belief and devotion is always in question.
Yeah.
You never feel you're doing enough. We've heard that from many. Even when you're doing a lot, or what the most you can, you still feel inadequate.
Yeah, and one of the footnotes here, Ray alludes to the fact that it wasn't one or another thing in itself that was the problem. It was the sheer accumulation of weight. And he says that even by Jesus' day, for instance, the traditions accumulating, let's say, about the Sabbath, what you could and couldn't do and how you had to do it on the Sabbath, filled 2 whole volumes. And then you can't help but think, well, that's the problem with our legal system, that technicalities burden,
Yeah.
and we need specialists called lawyers to sort it all out. And witnesses are expected to carry this immense load of responsibilities, and they're all expected to do more, like you say, all the time. And that forces the watchtower, because they can't reverse the policies to, I think, because of financial reasons, at least it was back then, that the publishing empire was their chief means of generating income. So the publishers have to do it. And so the pressure has to be continually applied. And in order to do that, to justify that, of course, they have to twist scripture, proof text scripture, and they're never going to re-examine the policies themselves, including, of course, the emphasis upon door-to-door activity. In the next segment, expressions of trusted, active elders.